It was a bright morning at JFK International Airport in New York. Passengers rushed through the terminal, their voices mixing with the constant hum of announcements. Among them was Michael Carter, a tall, confident man in his early 40s, dressed in a simple navy suit. He wasn't the kind of person who demanded attention, yet people noticed him. Calm, polite, and always composed. Michael had earned a reputation as one of the youngest and most successful CEOs in the tech industry. His company had just signed a major global deal. And this flight to London was supposed to be a quiet escape, a chance to prepare for his keynote speech at an international business summit. As he approached the first-class check-in counter, the airline staff greeted him with warm smiles. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Michael handed over his passport, thanked the attendant, and proceeded to the lounge. He ordered black coffee, opened his laptop, and began reviewing his presentation slides. Around him, business travelers chatted softly, unaware that the day would soon take a shocking turn that would make headlines across the world. When boarding began, Michael stepped onto the plane and was welcomed by the flight attendants. The crew seemed cheerful, joking among themselves. A few of them were filming short videos on their phones, part of what they called their fun in-flight vlog series. Michael smiled politely when one of them pointed the camera in his direction, asking if he wanted to say hi to their followers. He declined gently, saying he preferred privacy. The attendant laughed. "Oh, come on, it's all in good fun," but eventually moved on. As the plane took off, Michael settled into his seat, put on his headphones, and began reading a leadership book. He felt relaxed, unaware that a few rows behind him, the same attendants were talking about creating fun content to make passengers laugh. One of them mentioned, jokingly, "What if we did something silly with the passengers in first class?" The others laughed. It was supposed to be harmless entertainment for their social media followers. But sometimes, jokes can cross lines we don't see until it's too late. Hours passed smoothly. The cabin lights dimmed as passengers began to rest. Michael dozed off for a few minutes, his head slightly leaning to one side. A young attendant whispered to her colleague, "Look at his haircut. It's so precise. Imagine if someone gave him a little trim, just a joke." They giggled quietly. Another attendant, holding a small set of clippers used for a prop in their crew videos, joined in the laughter. "We could pretend to be his stylist," she joked. The idea, meant to be lighthearted, was about to turn into something far from funny. As Michael stirred awake, one of the crew members playfully said, "Sir, may we give you a quick in-flight makeover?" Michael smiled politely and replied, "No, thank you. I'm fine." He put his headphones back on, thinking it was just small talk. But the attendants didn't stop laughing. One of them said, "Just a little touch-up for fun." And before he could react, she leaned forward and ran the clipper over a small section of his hair. There was a sharp, buzzing sound, followed by silence. Michael froze. The sound of the clipper echoed louder in his mind than in the cabin. He slowly raised his hand to his head and felt the shaved patch. His eyes widened in disbelief. Around him, passengers gasped. A woman nearby covered her mouth in shock. Someone whispered, "Did she really just do that?" The attendant realized what she had done and immediately stepped back, her smile fading. "Oh my God, I didn't mean," she stammered. But it was too late. The moment had been recorded by at least 3 passengers' phones. Michael looked straight at her, not angry, not shouting, just quiet. His calm made the moment even heavier. He pressed the call button and asked for the flight supervisor. When she arrived, he explained what happened in a low, firm voice. The supervisor was speechless. "Sir, I am so sorry," she said, trembling slightly. But Michael simply nodded and replied, "Please make sure this incident is documented. I'll take it from here." As the plane continued across the Atlantic, the crew whispered among themselves, realizing the gravity of their mistake. Passengers exchanged glances, some already uploading the video online. The clip, only 12 seconds long, captured everything: the laughter, the buzzing sound, and the shocked look on the CEO's face. Within hours, it would reach millions. But at that moment, inside the quiet cabin at 30,000 feet, Michael Carter sat staring out the window. The stars looked calm against the night sky, a sharp contrast to the storm that was about to begin below. He didn't raise his voice or demand attention. Instead, he opened his notebook and began to write something down. It was just a sentence, but it would later become the most quoted line from his public statement: "When dignity is taken lightly, the fall of respect is only moments away." What began as an ordinary flight had now become the start of a story that would change the future of the airline industry forever. Asterisk. The plane hummed softly as it crossed the Atlantic. But inside, the atmosphere had changed completely. What had started as a friendly, calm flight now carried an invisible weight. Everyone could feel it: the awkward silence, the nervous glances, the quiet whispers. The passengers were still processing what had just happened, and so was Michael Carter. He sat motionless, eyes fixed on the small reflection in the window. The cool glass showed the uneven patch of hair on his head, a mark of disrespect that cut deeper than anyone could imagine. He wasn't just a passenger. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a human being, humiliated in front of strangers thousands of feet above the ground, a few rows behind him. The flight attendants gathered near the service area, whispering in panic. "I didn't mean to actually do it," one said, holding her hands over her face. "It was just supposed to be a joke. I thought it wasn't turned on." Another shook her head, her voice trembling. "We should tell the captain. This is serious." But instead of reporting it immediately, fear took over. They decided to stay quiet, hoping the moment would pass, hoping maybe the passenger would forgive and forget. But Michael wasn't angry in a loud way. His silence was powerful. Every minute that passed felt heavier. Like the cabin was holding its breath. About 20 minutes later, the flight supervisor approached his seat. She bent down slightly and spoke softly. "Mr. Carter, we are truly sorry. It was unprofessional and completely unacceptable. Please allow us to make this right." Michael turned his gaze toward her. His eyes were calm but cold. "You can't unshave what's already done," he said quietly. "You can only decide how you handle it now." His words struck deep. The supervisor nodded, unable to find a response. She promised a full report would be filed as soon as they landed. But deep down, she knew this was more than a report. It was going to be a disaster. Meanwhile, a young passenger in business class who had captured the incident on her phone was staring at the short video she'd just recorded. It was only a few seconds long, but the image was clear: a flight attendant laughing, a buzzing sound, and the shocked face of the man in the seat. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should share it. Then she whispered, "People need to see this." She uploaded it to social media with the caption, "This just happened on a flight to London." A CEO got his hair shaved as a joke by the crew. Disgusting and racist. Within minutes, the video began spreading. Even while the plane was still in the air, people on the ground were reacting. Retweets, comments, hashtags, the world was already talking. But up in the sky, no one knew yet how big it was becoming. Michael sat quietly, thinking about what this meant. He wasn't just thinking about himself. He was thinking about the message behind the act. How could anyone think humiliating another person for fun was acceptable, especially in a professional setting? How many people had laughed like that before, thinking it was harmless? He thought of his employees back at his company, people from different countries, cultures, and backgrounds who looked up to him as a symbol of hope. He had worked his entire life to break barriers, to prove that excellence has no color. And now, In one careless moment, he'd been reduced to someone's punchline. The seatbelt sign came on as the plane began its descent into Heathrow Airport. The passengers exchanged nervous looks. Everyone knew something serious was waiting to unfold once they landed. The captain made a calm announcement, but his voice carried tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please remain seated." The moment the wheels touched the runway, a sense of anticipation filled the air. Michael waited patiently as everyone gathered their belongings. The flight supervisor approached again. "Sir, the authorities will meet you at the gate. We've informed them." He nodded once and stood up slowly. The other passengers looked at him with quiet sympathy. Some offered apologetic smiles, while others looked down, ashamed of what they'd witnessed but hadn't stopped. As Michael walked out of the aircraft, his confidence returned. He wasn't going to hide or stay silent. He turned to the captain, who stood near the exit, and said in a measured tone, "Respect is earned by how you treat people when no one is watching. Unfortunately for your crew, the world was watching." Outside, a group of airport security officers and airline managers were already waiting. Cameras flashed. News alerts had begun buzzing across the world. The video had crossed 1 million views within the first hour. What had started as a funny moment for a few had become a global scandal for an entire company. The airline's name was trending, not for its service, but for its shame. Reporters were calling it the Sky Scandal, and activists were already labeling it a clear act of racial humiliation as Michael walked toward the airport lounge. His phone buzzed continuously, messages of support, outrage, and shock. But he didn't stop to read them. He simply whispered to himself, "This isn't just my story anymore. This is every person's story who's ever been disrespected and told to laugh it off." At that moment, he didn't know that his calm reaction, his silence, his dignity would soon become the spark that changed everything. The airline's reputation, its leadership, and even its future would begin to crumble in the hours that followed. The joke had crossed a line, and the world was no longer laughing. Asterisk as the passengers began leaving the plane. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to feel. No one spoke loudly. No one smiled. The laughter that once filled the air had turned into quiet guilt. A few attendants avoided eye contact with everyone, moving stiffly, their faces pale with shock. But one thing was clear. The story had already left the plane long before the passengers did. In the business lounge at Heathrow Airport, Michael Carter sat in silence. He had refused special assistance, choosing instead to wait quietly. His phone buzzed nonstop. Hundreds of messages poured in from his assistants, friends, and even journalists. The video from the plane was everywhere now. Millions had seen it. Some were angry, some heartbroken, and others simply couldn't believe it was real. A young reporter outside the terminal spoke to the camera, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. Just hours ago, on Flight 472, an airline crew member was caught on camera shaving a passenger's hair as a joke. That passenger is confirmed to be Michael Carter, the CEO of a major global tech company. The internet is calling this one of the most shocking acts of discrimination in modern air travel. Inside, passengers who had been on the same flight were already being questioned by airport staff. Some cried as they spoke. One woman said, "It wasn't funny." Everyone froze. "We didn't know what to do." You could tell he was humiliated, but he stayed so calm. It made us feel worse. Others were furious. "This wasn't a mistake," another passenger told reporters. "They thought it would be a fun video. That's not a joke. That's cruelty." Meanwhile, on social media, the video had taken on a life of its own. People all over the world shared it with captions like, "Unbelievable. How can this happen in 2025? He handled this with more grace than anyone could." Within hours, hashtags like hashtag Justice for Carter, hashtag Airline Shame, and hashtag Respect in the Sky trended across every major platform. Celebrities, activists, and business leaders began commenting. One famous talk show host tweeted, "When you mock dignity, you destroy trust. This is beyond unacceptable." In the airline's headquarters, chaos broke out. Executives scrambled into an emergency meeting. Phones rang endlessly. The PR team tried to prepare a statement, but every version they wrote sounded weak. Someone finally said, "We need to control the story before it controls us." But it was already too late. The story had wings of its own. Michael's calm reaction during the flight became a symbol of quiet strength. People admired how he hadn't yelled or caused a scene. In a world where outrage was common, his silence spoke louder than any scream could. The media replayed his final words to the captain. "The world was watching." That line became a headline. It was quoted in newspapers, shared on talk shows, and turned into powerful social media posts. People began connecting the incident to larger issues: racial bias, workplace training, and the hidden arrogance in service industries. Back at Heathrow, two security officers approached Michael gently. "Sir, would you like to make a statement?" one asked. Michael looked up, his tone calm but firm. "Yes," he said, "but not just yet. I'll speak when I know it will matter." He stood and walked toward the exit, surrounded by flashing lights and murmuring crowds. He didn't run from the attention. He walked through it, head held high, even with the uneven patch of hair still visible. Too many watching, that sight became unforgettable. A man wronged, yet still dignified. At the same time, inside the plane, the crew members sat waiting for investigators. One of them, the woman who had held the clippers, was crying uncontrollably. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered again and again. The captain, stern-faced, refused to look at her. "Intentions don't erase consequences," he said coldly. As airport officials entered to collect evidence, passengers continued to talk about the moment. Some still couldn't believe it had really happened. "It felt like time stopped," one said. "We all watched, and no one moved. We were too shocked. But now, I wish someone had stepped in sooner." By evening, news channels around the world were running live updates. Images of the airline's logo flashed on every screen. Anchors debated how such a thing could happen in a professional environment. Airlines across the world released their own statements condemning the act, desperate to distance themselves from the growing scandal. At Michael's hotel later that night, his assistant finally arrived, looking shaken. "The company board has already called an emergency meeting," she said. "Everyone's talking about it. It's everywhere." Michael sighed softly, looking out the window at the rainy London skyline. "Then let them talk," he replied, "because sometimes the world needs to talk before it learns to listen." Down on the streets below, protesters had already begun gathering. They carried signs that read, "Respect is not optional. Accountability at 30,000 feet. We stand with Carter." What had started as a moment of cruelty had now become a movement for change. The outrage in the sky had turned into a storm on the ground, and as the night deepened, one truth became clear. This was not just about a bad joke on a plane. It was about humanity, power, and the cost of forgetting respect. The flight had ended. But the real journey, the one that would shake an entire company and awaken millions, had just begun. The morning after the incident, the world woke up angry. What had started as a short, blurry video filmed on a plane had now turned into a global storm. Within 12 hours, it had been viewed more than 50 million times across every social platform. News outlets in every language covered the story. People didn't just see it, they felt it. The image of a calm black CEO, humiliated by those meant to serve him, struck a deep, painful chord everywhere. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Carter, Hashtag respect in the sky and hashtag shut down the airline dominated every trending list. On TikTok, creators posted emotional reactions. On Twitter, journalists dissected every second of the video. And on YouTube, commentators made hour-long breakdowns calling it the fall of corporate humanity. Even those who didn't know Michael Carter before now spoke his name with respect. Some called him the man who didn't need to shout to be heard. Others referred to him as a symbol of grace under humiliation. Meanwhile, the airline's official page was flooded with comments. Thousands demanded an apology. Others called for the CEO of the airline to resign. Within hours, the company's customer rating dropped to nearly zero. People began canceling their tickets, and travel influencers announced public boycotts. The company tried to respond with a short post. "We are aware of the recent incident involving one of our crew members. We are conducting a full investigation. This does not reflect our company's values, but that only made things worse." The internet saw it as an empty apology. One user wrote, "You don't investigate racism, you stop it before it happens." Another replied, "You can't claim values when you hire people who mock dignity." By noon, thousands of employees from other branches of the same airline were receiving hate messages. Some defended the company, others quietly updated their LinkedIn profiles, afraid of what was coming. Across the ocean, in his London hotel, Michael sat near the window, watching reporters swarm the street below. His phone was filled with messages, some from world leaders, some from people he'd never met. He read one from a young woman that said, "Thank you for staying calm. You showed us that silence can be stronger than hate." He closed his eyes for a moment. He hadn't planned to become a symbol. He hadn't asked for it. But now, the world was demanding his voice. Later that evening, a close friend and media advisor visited him. "Michael," she said gently, "you need to speak. People are waiting. They want to hear from you, not the journalists, not the company, you." Michael thought for a while before answering. "If I speak," he said slowly, "I want it to mean something. I don't want to fuel anger. I want to remind people that this isn't just about one man or one flight. It's about what we allow to be called a joke." The next morning, he agreed to appear live on a global news network. The moment he walked into the studio, the cameras clicked like thunder. The interviewer greeted him respectfully and said, "Mr. Carter, the world has seen the video. What do you want to say today?" He looked directly into the camera, his voice steady. "I don't want revenge," he began. "I want reflection. This isn't just about me. It's about how easy it's become to laugh at someone's pain. When respect becomes entertainment, humanity begins to disappear. We need to bring it back." The studio fell silent. The clip of that moment went viral again, but this time it wasn't about shock, it was about truth. People replayed his words over and over. Teachers used it in classrooms. Motivational speakers quoted it. Brands started posting messages about equality and respect, trying to join the movement. Meanwhile, the airline situation grew worse. Investors pulled out. Major partners ended contracts. Leaked emails showed that management had ignored previous complaints about crew misconduct. The media labeled it a culture of arrogance. Protests began forming outside airports in multiple countries. People carried banners that read, "It started with a joke, it ended with justice. Respect is not customer service, it's humanity. We stand with Carter." For the first time in decades, an airline's public image crumbled in less than 48 hours. Flights were being canceled. Pilots refused to wear company uniforms. One insider told reporters, "We're watching a giant fall, not because of a storm, but because of a single act of stupidity." Michael watched all of this quietly. He didn't gloat or celebrate. When asked how he felt seeing the airline collapsing, he simply said, "I feel sad." People lost their jobs. But maybe now, others will think before they laugh. As night fell, the glow of his phone screen reflected in his eyes, messages still pouring in from every corner of the world. Someone wrote, "You didn't just lose hair, sir. You uncovered truth." Outside, the sky over London was quiet again. But beneath that silence, the world was still roaring. A roar of justice, empathy, and awakening. Michael Carter's story was no longer just a headline. It had become a mirror, forcing everyone to look at what happens when power and prejudice mix with ignorance. And though the airline still existed, for now, its wings were broken. The world was watching, and it wasn't ready to forgive. Asterisk in the heart of the city. Inside the towering glass headquarters of the airline, chaos had replaced calm. The building that once buzzed with confidence and luxury now echoed with whispers, slammed doors, and ringing phones that no one wanted to answer. Executives rushed between meeting rooms, faces pale and tired. The company logo, once a proud symbol of global success, now looked like a mark of shame on every news channel. The incident involving Michael Carter had exploded far beyond anything they could control. The boardroom was packed. Screens around the room played live news coverage, reporters talking about boycotts, canceled flights, and the company's collapsing stock. On one screen, Michael Carter's interview replayed again. His calm words when respect becomes entertainment. Humanity begins to disappear, filled the room like a quiet thunder. The CEO of the airline, a man named Richard Hale, stood at the head of the table, trying to hold his ground. "We need to stay calm," he said firmly, though his voice trembled slightly. "This will pass. We'll issue another apology, maybe suspend a few employees." Interrupted one of the directors, slamming a folder on the table. "Richard, people aren't just angry, they're disgusted. We've lost 3 investors in the last 4 hours. Our stock has dropped 30%. This isn't a PR issue. This is a collapse." Another executive spoke up, his tone sharp. "And the crew involved. They're all over social media crying and apologizing. One even said the company encouraged them to make videos for publicity. If that's true, we're finished." The room went silent. Richard's face turned pale. He had indeed approved a social engagement program months earlier, encouraging flight attendants to record fun, viral content to make the airline seem more friendly and human. But no one had imagined it could lead to something like this. By afternoon, the airline's headquarters was surrounded by reporters and protesters. Signs reading "Accountability Now" and "End Corporate Arrogance" filled the streets. Security guards formed lines at the entrance, but cameras still caught every nervous employee walking in and out. Inside, staff members were receiving hundreds of hate messages and prank calls. Some started deleting their LinkedIn profiles. Others broke down in tears. "I've worked here for 12 years, one employee whispered to another. "I can't believe this is how it's ending." Meanwhile, government officials had launched a formal investigation into the airline's behavior and training practices. The Aviation Authority demanded all crew footage from the flight, all internal communication, and full records of company culture programs. The headline on a major news site read, "Airline Under Fire, Negligence or Corporate Cruelty." Richard Hale called another emergency meeting that evening. His tie was gone, and his voice had lost its power. "We can't let this take us down," he said. "We built this airline from nothing. We've survived fuel crises, strikes, and competition. We'll survive this." But deep inside, he knew it was different. You can fix numbers, repair planes, and rebuild profits, but you can't fix a broken image once the world stops trusting you. That night, several leaked emails appeared online. They showed that months before the incident, employees had complained about unprofessional behavior from some crew members. One email even warned, "Someone will eventually cross a line, and it'll destroy us." The public's anger exploded even more. People didn't just want an apology anymore. They wanted consequences. Politicians called for boycotts. Influencers urged travelers to choose other airlines. Rival companies released statements saying, "We stand for equality and respect in the skies." By dawn, several of the airline's biggest sponsors, including 2 international travel brands, ended their partnerships. The company's market value fell by half in less than a week. In the middle of it all, Michael Carter stayed silent. He refused to meet reporters, refused to comment further. His calm silence was now louder than any speech. Some said he was preparing a lawsuit. Others said he was letting the truth destroy them naturally. Inside the airline's office, Richard stared at the growing list of canceled flights on the big screen. How did a single act ruin everything? He whispered. One of his senior managers replied quietly, "It wasn't one act, sir. It was years of ignoring what was wrong." Those words hit him harder than any headline. For the first time, Richard realized this wasn't just about a viral moment. It was about what his company had become. The airline that once promised comfort, care, and class had turned into something hollow. That night, while employees packed up their desks and news vans circled the building, a small group of remaining board members gathered for one final private call. Their faces were lit only by laptop screens. One voice said softly, "We should prepare for the worst. The government might suspend our license." Silence followed. Everyone understood what that meant: the end. Outside, the city lights shimmered on the glass walls of the airline's headquarters. The reflection of its glowing logo looked like a ghost of what once was, and somewhere in another part of London, Michael Carter closed his laptop after reading yet another news alert about the company's downfall. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He simply whispered, "The sky doesn't belong to arrogance. It belongs to respect." The firestorm had begun inside a single cabin at 30,000 feet. Now it had consumed an entire corporation. And yet, the world wasn't done watching. The real collapse, the final, irreversible one, was still to come. Asterisk days turned into weeks, but the storm refused to calm. The airline had become a global symbol of shame, its name whispered in disgust across offices, airports, and television screens. Protesters still gathered outside its buildings, holding banners that demanded justice, not just for Michael Carter, but for everyone who had ever been disrespected in silence. Inside his quiet London apartment, Michael watched it all unfold from afar. News reports repeated the same story in endless loops, but he had stayed silent since his interview. He didn't tweet, didn't post, didn't respond to calls. It wasn't because he didn't care. It was because he wanted his next words to matter. One evening, his assistant, Clara, entered the room holding a folder full of requests. "Michael," she said gently, "the UN wants to invite you to speak about corporate ethics. Major universities are calling." And she hesitated. "The airline CEO, Richard Hale, is asking for a private meeting." Michael looked up slowly. "He wants to apologize." Clara nodded. "He says he wants to make things right before it's too late." Michael thought for a long time before replying. "I'll meet him," he said finally, "but not behind closed doors. The world deserves to hear the truth in the light, not in whispers." A few days later, an announcement shook the media. Michael Carter would hold a global press conference. Every major outlet confirmed attendance. The event was to be broadcast live across dozens of countries. People called it the speech the world needs. On the day of the conference, the hall was filled beyond capacity. Reporters, photographers, and ordinary citizens all gathered, waiting. The air felt heavy with anticipation. When Michael finally stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell silent. He wore a simple black suit, no tie, no luxury watch, just quiet strength. Behind him, a large screen displayed one sentence: "Dignity is not a privilege, it's a right." He stood before the microphone and began softly. 3 weeks ago, I boarded a plane as just another passenger. I expected peace, but I was met with humiliation. What happened to me could happen to anyone, and that's the problem. The crowd leaned in. Every word was clear, slow, and filled with meaning. When that crew member shaved my hair, people called it a joke. But let me tell you, jokes that strip dignity are not jokes. They are reminders that we still don't understand the value of respect. I didn't speak out for revenge. I spoke because silence feeds ignorance. Camera shutters clicked, but Michael continued calmly. I could have shouted that day. I could have demanded compensation or ruined lives out of anger. But I wanted something greater than punishment. I wanted understanding. The world doesn't change through rage. It changes through reflection. He paused, looking around the room. Some journalists had tears in their eyes. Even the live stream chat exploded with words like powerful respect, truth. Michael continued, his voice stronger now. We live in an age where people film pain for entertainment and call it content. But when we forget compassion, we lose our humanity. I'm not here to destroy an airline. I'm here to rebuild the idea of accountability. No business can fly higher than its ethics. The audience erupted in applause. But before he could continue, something unexpected happened. Richard Hale, the airline's CEO, slowly walked onto the stage. The crowd gasped. Security stepped forward, but Michael raised his hand, signaling them to stop. Richard looked broken, his shoulders slumped, his eyes tired. He took the microphone and said quietly, "Mr. Carter, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the truth. My company failed, not just you, but the values we claimed to stand for. I thought an apology would fix it, but watching the world's reaction made me realize we deserved this fall." Michael looked at him for a long moment. Then, in front of the cameras, he extended his hand. The room went silent again. Slowly, Richard took it. Michael said softly, "Apologies don't erase pain, but they can begin healing. Let's make this the start of something better for every worker, every passenger. Every person who's ever been told their dignity was a joke." The audience stood, clapping for nearly 2 minutes straight. Some cried. Some filmed. Everyone knew they were witnessing something bigger than a scandal. They were witnessing grace defeating hatred by the end of that day. Every major headline across the world read, "Michael Carter turned scandal into a movement. The man who forgave and changed an industry." His words were replayed in schools, quoted by leaders, and shared by millions. People began discussing workplace empathy, diversity training, and the true meaning of respect. And while the airline's financial future remained uncertain, something powerful had begun a shift in global conversation. Companies started reviewing their staff ethics programs. Airlines around the world introduced new rules on passenger respect and crew accountability. Michael didn't want fame, but he had become something far greater, a symbol of dignity in a world that had forgotten it. That night, as he walked outside the conference hall, a young boy approached him shyly. "Mr. Carter," he said, "my dad said you're the man who taught the world to be kind again." Michael smiled gently and replied, "No, son. The world always knew how to be kind. It just needed a reminder." He walked away under the city lights, calm and quiet, not as a victim, not even as a hero, but as a man who had turned pain into purpose. And somewhere deep inside that silence, humanity felt a little lighter again. The sun rose over a silent airport. Planes that once painted the sky with pride now sat motionless on the runway, like fallen birds stripped of their wings. The logo of the once glorious airline glimmered faintly on the tail fins, a ghost of its former reputation. The same company that once promised comfort in the clouds was now grounded by its own arrogance. Inside the headquarters, the atmosphere felt like a funeral. Desks were empty, screens were dark, and papers lay scattered as if the building itself had given up. Employees packed their belongings quietly, afraid to look each other in the eye. Some cried softly. Others simply stared at their ID badges one last time. Knowing the dream was over, the government's final decision had come that morning. The Aviation Authority had officially revoked the airline's operating license, citing gross ethical misconduct and failure to maintain professional standards. The airline's future was sealed. When the announcement hit the news, the world reacted instantly. Social media erupted again, but this time not in anger, in reflection. Comment sections were filled with messages like, "It all started with a joke. One act of disrespect ended an empire. This is what accountability looks like." At the same time, cameras swarmed the headquarters, capturing the final moments. The company's CEO, Richard Hale, stood before the press, his face pale, his voice unsteady. "We failed our passengers, our employees, and the world," he admitted. "We built planes but forgot humanity. For that, we pay the price." He stepped away from the podium, leaving the microphones buzzing with silence. Reporters shouted questions, but there were no answers left to give. In another part of the city, Michael Carter watched the live broadcast from his office window. The sky outside was a deep golden-orange calm, peaceful, almost poetic. He had just finished a meeting with several airline reform committees who wanted him to help design global ethics training programs for aviation staff. For once, he wasn't watching chaos unfold. He was helping rebuild something better. Clara, his assistant, entered quietly. "It's official," she said. "The airline is shut down. Permanently." Michael nodded slowly. "It had to happen," he said softly. "Sometimes something has to fall so the world can see what held it up." He stood and walked to the window, watching planes from other airlines take off gracefully. "You know," he continued, "it wasn't the shaving that destroyed them. It was the laughter. The belief that hurting someone for entertainment was normal. That's what killed them." Clara didn't reply. She just watched him, a man who had turned humiliation into hope, pain into purpose. Later that day, Michael agreed to appear one last time on national television. The host introduced him not as a CEO, but as a leader who redefined dignity. During the interview, the host asked, "Do you feel satisfied that the airline has shut down?" Michael smiled faintly. "No," he said. "You can't find joy in destruction. I don't celebrate endings. I celebrate lessons." The world didn't need another airline. It needed awareness. Maybe this fall will remind other companies that respect is not optional. The host nodded. "And what about you? What's next?" He paused, thinking. "I'll keep doing what I've always done. Build. But this time, not just technology. I want to build understanding." After the show, as Michael stepped outside, a small crowd waited. Among them was an elderly woman holding a sign that read, "Thank you for standing tall when the world wanted you small." She handed him a single white feather, a symbol of flight, but also of peace. He smiled and tucked it into his pocket. Meanwhile, back at the airline's hangar, workers were dismantling signs, removing banners, and closing off gates. One mechanic looked up at the empty sky and said quietly, "It's strange. We spent years trying to touch the clouds, and we never realized how far we were from being human." The sound of metal doors clanging shut echoed across the runway, a sound that marked the end of an era. By evening, every major news outlet declared the airline's official closure. But instead of celebrating the fall, most headlines honored the message it left behind. A joke that changed the world. The day respect became louder than profit. Michael Carter's story, from humiliation to humanity. That night, Michael sat on his balcony, looking up at the stars. The sky was endless, open, just as it had always been. For the first time since the incident, he felt at peace. The world had learned something, hey, and that was enough. He thought about the millions of people who had followed his journey, strangers who had turned outrage into awareness, anger into empathy. Somewhere out there, someone was thinking twice before mocking a person. Someone was choosing kindness over cruelty. And that, he realized, was the real victory. A soft breeze passed through, carrying the faint sound of a plane soaring high above. Michael smiled and whispered to himself, "The sky belongs to those who respect it." The world had moved on, but it would never forget. What began as a joke had ended as a legacy, a reminder written in the clouds that respect is the only thing that truly flies.